The Woman Who Named Eggs. I met her in Palo Alto, where I lived with my parents and my brother while I went to Stanford, and after my father was transferred by the NLRB from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. She was waiting at a bus stop outside of the upscale housing tract where my father had rented a new, comfortable ranch-style house. It was 1951. There were 3 significant things about that meeting in Palo Alto. I never picked up girls at bus stops. I never used that entrance to the development. She never accepted rides from strangers. That day, fate stepped in, and 2 years later, we were married. She was extremely pretty, with dark hair and a cute figure. She liked the nickname Dee then, and people we've known since college still call her that. I called her that too, or Deb, or Deborah, which is her name. She outgrew Debbie many years ago, about the same time she refused to drive the Volvo station wagon anymore, and we bought her a previously owned Mercedes. She evolved from a young mother who carpooled to relative independence and maturity. We usually call each other Honey, and I've always wondered how people come to use their particular pet names. Darling, dearest, sweetheart, munchkin. How do they evolve? My father, not openly demonstrative with her, sent my mother poems and letters addressed to Treasure when they were courting, and occasionally later on. Deborah was starting college and working part-time when we met. She left home when she was 16 and lived with a teacher and her husband, who befriended and mentored her. The Moriers, David and Fran, whom she met when they lived in Modesto. They were bright and worldly. Deborah had a good deal in common with them, and when they moved to Palo Alto, Deborah moved with them. She seemed to get along better with her parents, 2 brothers, and sister when she was on her own, and after our 3 daughters were born. She and her siblings grew up calling their parents Maxine and Bob, until one letter Maxine closed with, "Now that I'm 65 and a great-grandmother, I guess I should sign this Mom." Deborah insists, whenever I mention picking her up at the bus stop, that the only reason she got into my car that day was that she lived in the same development. I was wearing a Stanford jacket, and I had thick glasses. Right, guys from Stanford with thick glasses were never horny. We started dating regularly, dining out on cheap hamburgers and lots of pizzas at Rocky's Pizzeria, a crowded student hangout where KZSU campus radio program Operation Rhythm could sometimes be picked up, miles from the campus. Empty Chianti bottles hung in wicker from Rocky's ceiling. He threw a pizza dough in the window and always made room for us. As a fledgling DJ, I sometimes intercut several versions of the same song by different recording artists, an inventive but occasionally dissonant experiment. My tastes were eclectic. I played the big bands, featuring the great solo performers and vocalists, the trios, the quartets. I favored an array of folk music, as well as Rose Murphy, Nellie Litcher, Freddie Slack, Ella Mae Morse, Coleman Hawkins, Paige Kavanaugh, Johnny Garnieri, Dave Brubeck, Slim Gillard, George Shearing, Lonnie Johnson. As I gained confidence, I kibitzed more and more between records and enjoyed it. Stanford had a radio and TV institute at the time, which offered a major, but the lure of theater was just too strong. The stage, music, laughter, applause, Broadway. Deborah and I saw lots of movies, frequently murky, elusive foreign films, which she illuminated for me by explaining, "It's just about life." She's always been an impeccable critic. Her Lawrence of Arabia one-liner is, "All that sand." We particularly enjoyed the big, colorful Japanese epics, Gate of Hell, which required little explanation, the films of Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune, and of course the MGM musicals. And I liked the biographies of songwriters, like I'll See You in My Dreams, about Gus Kahn, Danny Thomas. We spent quiet evenings at the Moriers while Deborah lived with them, babysitting with her 2 boys, talking and slow dancing. When I was invited to dinner, David and Fran Morier proved to be pointedly intellectual and outspoken. David seemed overly protective, I thought, and I came to suspect that he had a yen for Deborah, although obviously he was older and thoroughly married. When my family moved to L.A., I eventually got a really crummy studio apartment in Palo Alto, upstairs above a cleaner's in an old, shaky wood frame building on a side street. Twice a day, when the cleaner started up and just before closing, when he shut down, the whole building shook. There were a couple of other apartments off the upstairs hallway, and people lived there, but I never saw them. It was both crummy and creepy. For a while, I worked nights at a local drugstore, and after work, I'd call Deborah from the payphone around the corner from the cleaners, and we'd talk until my change ran out. She'd moved to a nearby town by then, and lived with a couple of families as an au pair, going to school at the San Mateo JC, then at San Jose State, and working part-time. She's always been smart, ambitious, and energetic. I used to drive 30 minutes each way after work to see her for an hour or so, and we'd study together. Sometimes I'd read her homework to her until she fell asleep, exhausted from her busy schedule. One night, rather late, I left her sleeping and made my way outside stealthily, tripping over some glass milk bottles in the dark and waking up the entire neighborhood. Her host family suspected a cat burglar or a peeping Tom. My car broke down halfway home, and I was virtually broke. I called a cab from a nearby bar and gave directions to where my best friend Al Gibson lived with his aunt and her companion in an old house in the hills above Palo Alto. In the darkness, on the country road, I got lost, and for a while, the cab driver roamed the hills until I thought I spotted a house shape that looked familiar. I saw poorly in the dark and stumbled finding my way outside the stairway that led to Al's quarters above the garage. I woke him, and he loaned me cab fare and put me up for the night. The night before, Deborah and I were married. Al took me to the motorcycle races, and several years later, he and his wife, Lisa, rode across the country from New York on their motorcycle to visit us. We've always been in touch. I'd become friendly with the young cop on the beat in my neighborhood. There was no all-night parking, and I had nowhere to put my beat-up 42 Chevy Coupe, with a short-throw vacuum shift and only a ledge for a back seat. So I started inviting him up for coffee, and it paid off because he left my car alone. My relationship with Deborah flourished, although she stubbornly refused to get in the back of the coupe with me, even after I found a small chaise lounge pad at a used furniture store, which fit the ledge perfectly. Deborah would not tolerate it. But I finally managed to persuade her to visit my apartment a few months before we got married. She'd bring a big bag of groceries. My cupboard was usually bare, and actually cook. My idea of cooking was opening a package or a can of something barely edible. She complained that the kitchen was deplorable, and the bathtub was filthy, and what I generously referred to as the bed, it was actually an old army cot from somewhere, looked shaky and miserably uncomfortable. One night, we both sat close on the edge of the cot, and it broke. The next night, when my friend the cop came up for coffee, he grinned at it with a knowing look and congratulated me. The first time I asked Deborah to marry me was soon after I discovered that she, too, was a Nellie Lutcher and Edith Piaf fan. For me, that was the clincher. We were out driving in my little Chevy, and before I got all the words out, she started to laugh at me. I was hurt and a little embarrassed. Even though marriage was an unlikely prospect at the time, I pulled over, slammed out of the car, and stalked away, the key still in the ignition. She promptly got behind the wheel and drove off, leaving me looking foolish in the middle of the street. That should have given me fair warning of things to come. Visiting Deborah's family in Modesto one Sunday afternoon, I went out on the porch with her father and asked if I could marry her. Obligingly, he said something like, "What are you asking me for?" We got married during exam week of my junior year and spent our honeymoon painting our tiny motel-like apartment a warm brown over an awful flowered wallpaper when I wasn't studying for finals. The one small closet held our clothes, wedding presents, a half bottle of flat and cheap champagne, and a piece of stale wedding cake. I was busy in the theater and drama department by then and not working, so Deborah quit school to help us out. We couldn't afford wedding pictures. My brother-in-law Wayne Smith took a few snapshots. He and Deb's sister Donna were married about 6 months before us. Nearly a year later, when Deborah was pregnant and I was about to graduate, I traded services with a wonderful Palo Alto photographer, Maxine Kellogg, who took lovely portraits of Deborah. She looked especially beautiful again in her wedding dress. Maxine's husband was a scientist who devised the new color theory. He needed someone to edit his Triste. I must have learned about it at Stanford Bulletin Board. Mr. Kellogg was kind, elderly, and arthritic. I enjoyed working with him, but his paperwork was a mess. I eventually managed the editorial chore, but I barely understood one word. Later, I applied for a technical writing position with Douglas Aircraft in San Diego, and surprisingly passed the extensive test. But again, I had no idea what I was doing and declined the offer. I also applied for a job with Procter & Gamble somewhere in the Midwest, but they turned me down. Our first daughter, Melissa, was born the following November in San Francisco, where I was acting with the Children's Theater Company. Our recollections of that period are quite different. Deborah was involved with her pregnancy, and I with my fledgling career. After performing all day at Bay Area schools, I was directing little theater productions at night. Within a year, we moved to L.A., with Melissa and $300 we'd managed to save. We figured that would go further in L.A. than in New York, and in L.A. we could live with my folks for a time. Those seemed to be the only choices. We agreed to give the search for gainful employment in the entertainment industry 3 years, not wanting to be trapped in a lifetime of disappointment and frustration. We were lucky. While I looked for a job and did a little writing, Deborah worked as a high fashion and junior sportswear model. During the next few years, I made some progress and finally became a producer. We'd had Robin and Susan by then, and were hosting a cavalcade of Japanese exchange students and housekeepers. So Deborah went back to school, eventually earning her bachelor's degree in art. While the kids were in school, Deborah painted, sculpted, took classes, and carpooled, not only our kids, but our Japanese students and the housekeepers, who wanted to continue their educations. It was not uncommon for me to come home at night and find my daughters babysitting with a housekeeper's child while Deborah picked Mom up from night classes. Oh yes, there were babies, and boyfriends, and husbands, oh my. Deborah was in her 30s when her vision began to fail, and she was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, a degenerative eye disease that usually results in total blindness. She had been working towards a master's degree in art. Undaunted, she literally changed course and got her advanced degree in marriage and family therapy. As painting became increasingly difficult, she slowly built a successful private practice and over time began seeing a number of patients, both in her home office and in a more formal rented office nearby. She also became actively involved in various professional organizations, like Toastmasters and the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, where she won numerous awards and held various offices. She's listed in Who's Who in California. Finally, when driving became impossible, Deborah was forced to give up that convenience, but as always, she maintained her independence. For 31 years, we lived in L.A. suburb of Woodland Hills, in a rambling house on an acre that spilled over onto several levels. Down from the street to a small orchard below. Behind the house was a patio, then the pool level, and beyond that, the fruit trees. Deborah had lived on a small farm as a child, and she was eager to put some of our bare land to good use. So we planted vegetable gardens and a big field of corn, which I plowed by hand, and which grew abundantly. When the girls were small, we'd send them down to pick corn for dinner and watch them disappear among the tall, green rows. Later, we built a garage in the same area, on the slab where we found out there had once been a cow barn. And I planted a few rows of corn near the side fence. That was a big mistake. There was a goat next door, and 2 horses. The horses simply leaned over the fence and devoured our delicious crop. The goat got into Deborah's garden one day, through a gate that someone had left ajar. I chased it down, followed by the neighbor's housekeeper, finally caught it, and bit its ear. I'd heard somewhere that was a way to gentle horses. Why not goats? The housekeeper screamed as the animal went to its knees, then sprawled stubbornly on the ground. I dragged it back up the driveway by its useless tether, struggling with its heavy, inert form. the housekeeper screaming in Spanish. I think I heard the word loco several times, and gesturing wildly. At last, the smelly beast was restored to its own yard, and the housekeeper retired inside to consider other employment. Later, I learned that new client of Deborah's, looking for the entrance to her office, was horrified when she witnessed the traumatic event. Nevertheless, to Deborah's credit, she kept her next appointment. We were zoned RA, Residential Agricultural, and in addition to goats and horses, there were chickens, sheep, burros, and at least one llama in our neighborhood, even a peacock. Kids went horseback riding in the fields down the paved residential streets, and I seem to remember horses tied up outside an early McDonald's in our small local shopping center. There was a wonderfully cluttered mom-and-pop hardware store then, where the cordial owners vowed to deliver even cup hooks in an emergency. One of the childhood anecdotes Deborah used to tell the girls was how in the cold winters her grandmother would boil an egg and put it into Deborah's mittened hands to warm them on the way to school. That memory was vivid, and it may have had something to do with Deborah's decision to raise chickens way down below near the back fence, in a coop that it's only Fritz the carpenter built for her. A neighbor gave her some white leghorns to start, and one thing led to another until she had Wyandottes, Rhode Island Reds, Barred Rocks, Langshans, and Arukins. One day, I came home from work with a show rooster, a partridge coochin I'd paid $25 for at a place nearby that grew crops and sold small animals and fowl. He was splendidly handsome and, as it soon became clear, full of testosterone. I tossed him over the fence of the coop Fritz had built and waited in the house. When Deborah came home, she predictably went down to check on her flock, and after a moment I heard her yell, "Joel, help! A rooster got in with my chickens." I must say that as a city boy, I didn't really make the connection, but soon there were chicks of different sizes and colors all over the place. Fritz had to build an annex to the nesting hens, and the rooster, I swear, strutted around smiling. Deborah gave all the hens names: Annabelle, Cinderella, Phoebe, Guinevere, Hezekiah, Aranad, Tiffany, Crystal, and Polly. The rooster she called Dionysus. I was unaware that every breed of hen lays its own distinctive egg, each shell a different size, shape, texture, and color. One breed lays eggs with green shells. When special friends came to visit, Deborah would give them a dozen eggs to take home with them. Tucked into an egg carton, each one unique and each one autographed with the name of the hen that laid it. Those who received her cartons often reciprocated by gifting Deborah next time they came with stone eggs, clay eggs, marble eggs, designer eggs, decorative eggs of various kinds. Small egg shapes, cases, and containers, until there was simply no way we could accommodate them all. Eventually, Deborah gave up her poultry, but around the house, in cupboards and on shelves, we still have some of those presents, reminders of Dionysus, crowing his lusty crow, and exhausted chickens squawking their alarm.